Hi, Warriors of Light. This is Heather Alexandra for Kotaku.com, a video game website about video games, and I am here to talk about Shadowbringers, the new expansion for Final Fantasy XIV. So I flew out to San Francisco last week, and I got to play an entire day's worth of Shadowbringers. I played a new dungeon, explored the open world, got to play all of the old classes at the new level cap of 80, and I got to see all sorts of cool new abilities. And then I, most importantly, was able to play the two new classes that are coming to the expansion, which are Gunbreaker, a new tank class, and Dancer, a new ranged DPS class. And I have to say, I really like these two new classes. I'm coming in here without a script. I want to talk to it really loosely to give you guys an idea of how the mechanics for this class works. In the video, I'm going to hover over the tooltips for each of the attacks for Gunbreaker, but I'm not going to break them down in detail. If you want to look at those, you can pause the video, or you can read each of them in detail in an article that I've posted on our website. The link is in the description down below. But for now, let's talk about Gunbreaker. Of the two classes that I played, the two new classes that I played, Gunbreaker was the one that felt the most natural. I understood it much quicker than Dancer, and some of that is because there have been some changes to the way that tanking works in Final Fantasy XIV, which I'll talk about very, very briefly. The first is that there's no more offensive stances, there's only tank stances, which means that you're not jumping into a DPS stance when you want to do extra damage, and then hopping into your tank stance when you want to do, extra enmity generation or gain some extra defense. Instead, you only have the one stance. It's your tank stance. It doesn't reduce your DPS anymore. It doesn't buff your defense. Instead, tanks just have a flat additional bit of defense built into them now. And when you toss on your tank stance, all it does is grant a little bit of extra threat generation, a little bit of extra enmity generation, so that if you are main tanking, you turn on your tank stance, you hop in, you don't need to worry about reducing your DPS, you can grab enemy attention, and that's that. It's really, really great, makes it nice and easy to focus on your role as a tank, means that you don't need to sacrifice, optimal damage or anything like that. And so I like that a lot. I'm not somebody who was a really big fan of stance dancing, either on tanks or back in the day, I'm a white mage main, so I never really liked having to hop into cleric stance when I wanted to do DPS or things like that. I think having tanks just focus on tanking when they want to and having the one stance streamline things a little bit, which I think is really great. And then also, to sort of help with this streamlining, they've gotten rid of DPS attack rotations, which means that you don't jump into an attack rotation, a DPS rotation when you want to do damage, and an enmity generation rotation when you want to generate more threat. Instead, you just have the one rotation. It's nice and simple. And with Gunbreaker, the cool thing about that rotation is that the way that Gunbreaker works, you can extend that rotation into a much more complicated combo. Let's just talk about it. Let's talk about Gunbreaker. Gunbreaker's big thing is that it has a gunblade, which is fantastic because gunblades have been in Final Fantasy XIV for a while now, but we've mostly been getting hit by them, like Imperial soldiers have been whacking us with their gunblades, but we haven't been hitting them with ours because we don't have any. Instead, Gunbreaker finally gets a gunblade. All the attacks are really cool and stylish. It's a very edgy, kind of tough, like rough and tumble class, and I think it captures the feel of using a gunblade in a nice way. The way that they try and do this is with the class's main mechanic, which is something called the powder gauge. So the powder gauge is what you see kind of on the right-hand side of my screen. That big red dot right there is telling me that I'm in the tank stance, which for Gunbreaker is called Royal Guard, which I thought was funny because it's kind of a Devil May Cry reference. And then you'll see there are these two little dots there, and those represent places where you will gain cartridges. So anytime you perform a combo rotation as Gunbreaker, which ends either in one attack, a normal attack called Solid Barrel, or another called Sonic Break, which adds a damage over time effect to the ability, you gain a cartridge. And when you have cartridges, you can spend them on special abilities. Some of those are just boosted versions of attacks that you sort of have already, and then some of them are more special attacks. So for instance, to give an example of that, a basic area of effect attack you have is something called Demon Slaughter. And what that does is that, if you use it by itself, you just kind of do a big sweeping circle attack that hits all enemies. If you have a cartridge, you can instead use an attack called Fated Circle, which is another spinning circle strike, but instead it adds the extra boosted damage of using your gunblade, adds an explosive effect, does a lot more damage. It's really, really great. It's nice and easy to understand. When you have a cartridge and you want to augment a certain skill or a certain attack type, you just select the different attack and you get to use that instead. Also, you might notice that Fated Circle is the name of a limit break from Squall in Final Fantasy VIII. A lot of the attacks for Gunbreaker use Squall's limit break names, which I thought was very, very cool. I'm going to look at this in action for a second. So what happens is you'll notice that I'm going to hop into battle here, and I'm going to start using my basic attack rotation. So I go into my first attack, which is just a normal attack, my second attack, which is something called Brutal Shell, which heals me, and then my final attack, which will grant me a cartridge. And from there, you'll see I'm spending it on all of these attacks that pop up on my bar that are special attacks that use the cartridge. One of the things that you might notice as you watch this video is at the top of my bar, you're going to see in my Shift 3 spot on my hotbar, an ability that keeps on changing into different things. And this is the ability that I think is actually the thing that secretly makes Gunbreaker really, really fun. This is an ability called Continuation. You get this at level 70, and what happens is, with this attack, is that it changes into a different attack depending on whatever attack happened before it. So for instance, you might do your basic attack rotation, use Gnashing Fang, which is this one ability, and because you used Gnashing Fang, Continuation has turned into a new attack called Jugular Rip. You can use Jugular Rip now instead, so it allows you to extend your combo. And if you're using your attacks in the right order, what happens is that instead of just having a 3 attack or 4 attack combo, you can have an attack combo that's up to like 6 or 7 attacks, because what will happen is you'll hop in, do your attack combo, start spending your cartridges, and then just keep on bouncing back to the continuation skill, and it ends up being a pretty lengthy combo whenever you want to do some single target DPS. I'm going to look at a version of that now where I hop in, I spend an attack, boom, continuation has turned into something, I attack there, I use another attack, continuation has turned into a different attack, I use another, continuation changes again, I've used this combo, it's a nice long combo, it allows you to do a lot of cool damage as Gunbreaker. It feels nice and active, it kind of captures that feeling of swinging your blade but also pulling your trigger and paying attention to your ammo. And the nice thing about this basic combo is that it's easy to understand, easy to augment, you can end it whenever you feel is necessary, and then Gunbreaker, it doesn't just have these attack abilities, it has these really useful defensive abilities, which aren't just cooldowns that will make you more tough, but will actually protect your teammates as well. So for instance, at level 64, you gain an ability called Heart of Light, which reduces the damage taken by yourself, but also by all of your teammates around you by around 15%. But instead of just Heart of Light, there's also Heart of Stone, which will reduce the damage, but also allow you to heal a teammate whenever you use your basic attack rotation. So you have ways to heal your teammates, you have ways to grant them defense. You have one ability that is actually just a heal over time. What it does is you toss it on somebody and it's just a healing dot. It grants a little bit of healing. It's around a potency of like 200. A little bit of healing over time, which means that if you are feeling beaten up as the main tank, you might toss it on yourself. If one of your teammates is getting really low, a DPS pulls threat off the main tank and takes a hit, you can give them a little bit of healing. Or if you're an off tank and you want to help your main tank, you can toss it on them too, which is really, really great. The sort of desperation ability that you have, which is, like Living Dead for a Dark Knight or things like that, is an ability called Super Bolide, which reduces your HP to 1, but also makes you basically impervious to attacks for around 8 seconds. So the idea with Gunbreaker is that you'll hop in, build up your resources, grab some cartridges, and decide how you want to spend them. You might spend them on big area of effect attacks, you might use them to expend your combo, make it nice and long, or in between those moments in combo where you're hopping from an attack to, whatever your continuation attack is in your combo chain, you might toss out a couple of special buffs to make your team feel nice and safe. It's really, really great. It's fun. It feels pretty active, but it's also really understandable. You only have to hop into battle a handful of times against enemies to start to understand what this class is about. One last thing that happens with this class is that tanks and ranged DPS now have special role actions that allow them to interrupt enemy casts. So one of the role actions that you get is an ability called Interject, and you can use that whenever you want to interrupt an enemy who's casting. So that actually makes playing as a tank feel a little bit more active. You can pay attention to enemies, interrupt their attacks. With Gunbreaker, you can decide when you want to spend your cartridges on special attacks. You can build out your combo chain as long or as small as you want. You have a lot of abilities that can buff your teammates. It felt really active. It felt really cool. I hopped into the new dungeon that I got to play with this, and I'm not somebody who main tanks or tanks a lot in this game. Tend to prefer to heal, but I didn't feel at a disadvantage. It felt nice and easy to understand. I think people who are looking for a change of pace in their tanking will really enjoy Gunbreaker. I think people who are intimidated and kind of want to try something new can hop into this and really learn it and do a decent job at it. This was definitely, of the two classes that we played, the one that was easiest to understand, the one that I had a lot of fun with. It's just super stylish. It's super sleek. The tank changes make things a little bit easier for everybody. I really want to play it. I want to play more Shadowbringers. I want to play more Gunbreaker. I'm really excited to hop in and play more of this class. Yeah, that's it. I love it. It was super fun, and I hope you liked this footage.